It's 2014, and I roll up to the SMU track on my Honda Ruckus in mid-July. It's a balmy morning, and I'm wearing not one, not two, but three pairs of tights because that's supposed to help with compression and performance. I have a cutoff t-shirt that says US Bobsled, and I'm meeting my training partner, Thomas White, who we call Tommy T-Levels. That was a nickname that he gave himself, letting us know how high his testosterone levels were. And we're here, as we typically do, to train for speed. Now, in bobsled, you typically will train for 60 and 30 meters, but today we decided to go off script and see where our 40-yard dash is. We set the timing eyes up. I go through a thorough warm-up. I make sure that my track spikes are extra tight, and I'm off. I'm pretty sure that I hold my breath the whole time, and it feels like I've blacked out. Now, what's ironic is that the first time that I was at this track was 14 years earlier. The conditions were much different. It was March. It was cloudy outside. It had started to drizzle, and I'm there with my dad. We're there because as a part of the application process to get into the Naval Academy, which is what my dream was, you have to go through what's called a candidate fitness assessment. Now, at this point, I had never run more than 400 meters. All growing up, I was underdeveloped, had really bad asthma, and so running isn't something that I ever thought sounded like fun or a good idea. And most of my focus and attention had been on academics, on being creative, where I felt way more confident. So being out here doing this assessment was a new experience for me. And I can only imagine what it was like to be my dad, who was watching his son start and stop like the little engine that could several times, knowing that he was going to fail this test. I couldn't do a single pull-up. I remember doing the push-up part, failing that as well. And I remember looking up at my dad's face, and the words that came out of his mouth was, "Hey, that's okay." But I knew that the look on his face told me, "Hey, man, you're not going to be able to do this thing that you think that you want to do." Now, from there, I decided that I'd go join an ROTC program. At A&M, there's the Corps of Cadets, and I thought this would be more or less like a backdoor loop to getting into the academy. Now, in College Station at 6 a.m., every morning you stumble out of the concrete barracks wearing these red, basically like Daisy Duke shorts, and you go into a formation run. And if you're unfamiliar with that, a formation run means that there's going to be somebody in front that is leading the pace. However, this person is not thinking about how accommodating he can be. He's thinking about how quickly he can get this whole group of guys with shaved heads to run. And so once again, very quickly, I couldn't keep up. That happened so frequently that I had to go into what's called a remedial PT group. And in that group, there was a guy with a prosthetic foot, and there were 3 diabetics and me. And I remember in the darkness falling out of yet another run saying, "Man, I've got to do something about this." Now back to the track on that sunny July morning, I'm 40 pounds heavier. Most of that is muscle. At this point, I now own my own gym. I've traveled the country coaching coaches. And miraculously, I'm a member of the U.S. bobsled team. I crossed the finish line and I asked my training partner, Tommy, hey, what's my time? And he shows me the stopwatch and it says 4.49999999. But all I feel at that point is worry. Worry that the clock is wrong. Worry that there's no way that I could have run that. Worry that I'm a poser about to be found out amongst real athletes doing a sport that I have no business participating in. Worry that I'm not strong enough. Worry that I'm not fast enough. Worry that I'm not good enough. The way that I combat that is to try to throw myself even more into training, to try to look for validation, not in the ways that I should, but in this identity that I've put on a pedestal as if I could achieve it, it would make me happy. I turned my attention away from my wife, away from my newborn kid, away from my business, and basically away from anything else that wouldn't give me the validation that I was looking for. Now, the irony is that on the outside, you would have said, man, this guy's in good shape. At 18, I would have told you this is exactly where I want to be. Internally, it was one of the darkest and most anxious times of my life. I was a coach's wet dream as far as adherence, as far as discipline. Anything you told me to do, I would do it. Yet, getting my blood work done, I was pre-diabetic. I was suffering from some pathology that you couldn't see on the surface level. I looked the part, but I wasn't really that person. I was still, in lots of ways, that 18-year-old kid in the rain. And so I share this story with you to ask you this question. Does being in great shape demand that your life will be great? I would argue that it doesn't. Further, I would argue that we need to address a more complete image, a higher resolution of what it means to be a human as fitness coaches. And so I think that we need to shift the focus from fitness, which despite all the tools that we have is still one-dimensional, to health, which quite possibly could be and is multidimensional. I'm Spencer Nix. For the last 15 years, I've been the owner and chief researcher at Behavior and Performance Research. I have an advanced degree in neuroscience and applied cognition. And in this podcast, we're going to teach you how to coach the complete client. Now, in this episode, I'm going to show you why it's so important to transition from a traditional fitness center to more of a new age health club. I'm going to show you some simple steps that you can take to immediately do that. Now, let's start with the why. In the story that I shared, fitness can seem one-dimensional, meaning that despite all your best efforts, if all you're focused on is performance, then it is a low resolution image of what it really means to be a human being. In other words, you could do everything right as far as coaching the squat, do everything right as far as programming these mixed modal and broad and intelligently designed workouts. And it wouldn't demand that you would have the impact on someone's life um, that would make it as good as it possibly could be. Now, this concept of shifting from fitness, which is one dimensional, to health, which I would say is multidimensional, isn't a new concept. Let's change the topic from fitness to medicine. And in 1976, there was a doctor named George Engel that coined this term biopsychosocial. That's a great $10 dinner word, but it also provides a great heuristic, a great framework to make this transition. Bio meaning biological, psycho meaning cognitive or psychological factors, and then social is obvious. And what he was trying to describe is that at that point, it was very common in medicine to just treat one singular symptom and to think of illness as one dimensional, and often to just treat that with medication or one protocol. And what he was presenting, which has since taken a long time to catch on, but it is catching on, is that in order to treat the patient, you need to step back and look at the landscape of all the factors that may be involved in that pathology. I think that fitness can be the same thing because, as I mentioned already, it can, even the best centers can still be just focused on that one thing. And you might hear this and say, well, yeah, but we've expanded to nutrition and we've expanded to, lifestyle factors. And I think that's a great step in the right direction. But the goal is to make the territory as expansive as possible. And you might ask why. And the answer is because each person potentially is different. You might have someone show up like myself that is in good shape, but there's other factors that are the limitations. There's other factors that if you applied leverage there, it would produce much better results, not just for their fitness, but the whole reason that we're doing exercise, which is to make our lives better. Now, today you can see examples of this playing out. There are social groups for people with diabetes. Alcoholics Anonymous is one of the strongest social structures in existence, and it's founded on something that doesn't have to do with hobbies or playtime. There are medical centers that have gyms in them now, and so you're starting to see this crossover or this expansion from this one singular focus to this multidimensional focus. What's cool is that I think for gyms, the same thing can happen. If you think of bio, psycho, and social as these three knobs and variables that you could manipulate and work with, for most of us that run a gym or work in a gym, there's already a really strong social structure. Now, there's going to need to be some tweaking there because oftentimes when you get a group of people together with no boundaries and no direction, it can become really dysfunctional. It can become very hierarchical. And so we'll have lots of episodes where we break that down and we talk about that. As far as the biological component goes, we're already set up. I mean, think how much easier it is for someone in a gym setting to transition from really, really hard, non-sustainable workouts to something that you could maintain long-term. We'll have some episodes where we talk about customization and we talk about the structure for coaches, and we talk about how you might be able to maintain group structure while still having some individualization. And then the last component is probably the most fuzzy, and that's the psychological component. For years, we've been experimenting with this, and most of the pushback looks like this from coaches. Hey, I'm not I'm not a shrink, so how could I possibly feel confident with some of this subject matter? But let's change the perspective just for a second. And for those of us that have been coaching fitness for a long time, we very easily stepped into the role of providing nutritional advice. We're not dietitians, but we realize that it's still within our scope of practice to appreciate the influence that nutrition has on performance. And so we've justified why it's okay not to interpret blood work or to, uh, you know, make recommendations for medication, but it is totally appropriate to come alongside someone and provide some very cursory level education and some accountability around the choices that they're making as far as nourishment. From a psychology standpoint, there are so many tools that if you didn't know that I was administering psychotherapy to you, you would just think that I'm being a good friend. I believe, and one of the big points of this podcast is to demystify and deconstruct some of those tools, some of those protocols that we think only happen when you're lying horizontal in a counselor's office. And by incorporating that, it doesn't mean that you're going to magically fix people. I don't believe that's the point, but it does give you a much better understanding of who it is that you're dealing with. Segue, there was a post made through CrossFit on Instagram, and it said, a CrossFit coach can change your life. And there were thousands of comments. And I thought about that. And I believe that the way that they wrote it was accurate. They didn't say a CrossFit coach will change your life. They said a CrossFit coach can, which means there's a potential that could happen. But I would ask you to think just for a sec what that actually means. Does it mean that by me having a great command of a group and being able to hold you in the bottom of an air squat while administering verbal, visual, and tactile cues, that's going to change your life? Take it one step further. Would you say that anything that I'm going to do in a group scenario is going to make a lasting impression that you'll never be the same? I would argue that that statement has literally jack shit to do with fitness. It has nothing to do with what's going to happen within the 60 minutes that you're training with that coach. When you look at some of the comments, you see that what they're referring to is a relationship. What they're referring to is how the coach went outside the confines of that structure to actually be a guide to that person. And so it really brings into the question, well, lots of existential concerns. What does it mean to change your life? What does a good life mean? What's even the point of fitness? And these are questions that I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole of philosophy, but I think at some point it is important. What I'll hinge on right now is that if you really want to be a good coach, it's paramount that you recognize that your impact on people isn't solely based on how great you are at coaching fitness, especially in a group scenario. Now, take just for a sec this concept that I'm talking about. Close your eyes and imagine that there's a place, there's a facility that when you step into, they immediately recognize the individual that you are. They're not saying that you're a unique snowflake and that you deserve to be banished into the corner because you are so unique. They recognize that you need to be a part of a really encouraging, but a really truthful a group of individuals that are all trying to be better. In this social structure, there's very little competition with each other. That means that the only thing that this support group has in common is that they are trying to all be better versions of themselves. Secondly, you're prescribed exercise, you're prescribed movements that you feel successful with, that's challenging, but you know that you will be able to progress for a very, very, very long time. Lastly, you are connected and attached in a deep relationship with a coach that you know is not trying to fix you, but is seeking to understand who you are, and that you will progress in this system for as long as your heart desires. Now, take that thing that I just tried to illustrate and strip it away. Strip it away where the only thing you get now is a 60-minute fitness class with good music, barbell slamming, and hard workouts. And tell me how you feel. If you're like me, you say, you know what? That feels a little short-sighted. But that's what fitness is right now. It's all it is. And you can tell me, oh man, a CrossFit coach can change your life. But I would like for that sentence to change that a coach will change your life. And that doesn't mean that we're omnipotent. It doesn't mean that we have this godlike ability to force people to do things. But it means that we've expanded our skill set. We've changed our facilities in ways that sets us up to be much more likely to do what that sentence says. Now, from here, let's transition into the how. That's all about the why, and hopefully I told a compelling narrative. But when we talk about how, I think there's a strong argument that you do have to have an individual relationship with each person that steps into your facility. Now, if you have lots of people that come into your gym, it probably means that you have to change the structure. If you have 1,000 people, you need to break that down to a manageable size that each one of your staff can actually handle, administer, and abide with, to use a more religious term. Now, the next thing is that you have to understand that this person that you're dealing with is going to have some unique characteristics that may not be exactly like everyone else. And so the question is, well, how do you decipher that? Like, how do you figure it out? And the lesson for today, students, is that you have to ask the right questions, and you have to have a platform that allows you to get better answers. So here's what you do. Step one, step back and consider all of these things that I'm talking about. Consider all the things that you'd like to know about your client. Consider all the things that if you had these nuggets of information, it would allow you to do your job better. Do your job better while you're coaching. Do your job better in these ways that you might interact with the client outside of that workout structure. Second, write these down. Write down what you would like to know. And there's so many ways to do this, and there's so many ways to research this. I'll give you a few just as a way to kind of spark your creativity. I'd want to know something about their current level of recovery. I'd want to know something about their self-reported level of fitness and health. I'd want to know something about how they connect purpose, how they connect their identity, their beliefs with fitness. I want to know what their current level of stress and emotional stability looks like. And I'd want to hear what they rank their nutrition. Now, there's a right and a wrong way to do this. If you go up to somebody and say, hey, tell me about your belief system, they'll they'll look at you and be like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Hey, tell me what you feel like your purpose is as it relates to fitness. And you're like, I don't know. And if you keep asking very direct questions like that, most of the time, people on the spot will just give you answers that they think that you want to hear, which kind of defeats the purpose, right? If you're trying to get to know someone. And so I would encourage you to ask the question like this, and it's nothing that I made up. Hey, tell me about nutrition. 10's high, 1's low. What's your number? Now, this scale of 1 to 10 is something that actually is borrowed from the world of psychology, right? It's what's called a Likert scale, and that Likert scale is a way to subjectively give someone permission to fall into a range of feelings. Now, if you ask that question, be like, hey, 10's high, 1's low, how would you rank your fitness right now? Somebody says a 10, well, it means that they feel very strongly about that response. That to me would be very interesting to hear more about. That to me would be an answer to be like, whoa, man, that's a high number. What's the story there? Like, tell me what that's about. On the other side of that spectrum, if somebody says, oh, it's a 2, man, probably there's a story, there's a narrative, there's more information that if you could hear it, it would paint a much more rich picture of where that person is currently at. So I really like using that as a framework of asking questions. And then my last bit of advice is whatever answer you get, don't try to fix them. Coaching is equal parts science and art. Science are the progressions. It's the mathematics of how we look at points performance and how we logistically and systematically coach a class and progress someone for something. But this thing that we're talking about is more the responsibility of a craftsman. As you gather information on your client, it's just to gather information. It's just to get to understand them better. Now, eventually, you'll use this information in a way that will feel very individualized for them. Back to the bobsled analogy, if you got me and you were able to ask the right questions, you would know that nutritionally, psychologically, probably even from an emotion and recovery standpoint, that's where most of our conversations should be had. Not conversations where you have to say the magic words and cast a spell on me and fix me, but more than anything, just provide a dare I say, safe place to just have those conversations so that your client might address them in a healthy manner before it propagates and perpetuates to a place that's truly pathological. Now, this stuff that I'm saying happens in real time. And yes, it's going to require you to do something besides coach thrusters. But it can also happen as a questionnaire. It can also happen as something that you administer and you give as a part of this process that you potentially are thinking about expanding into as we go from fitness centers to these modern new age health clubs. This thing that I'm talking about, we have already created. We call it a BPR psychometric, and linked to this podcast will be a way that you could experience that yourself. I'm giving you this because I want you to copy it. I want you to steal it. I want you to use it. I want you to be equipped to start to expand your own skill set beyond just fitness. And I think this is a great way to do that. On this psychometric, there are questions about recovery, about fitness, about stress, emotional health. And the output is a PDF that's not very complicated, but it does give you a composite score, and it shows you, as I mentioned earlier, like, hey, this may be your limiting factor. We take that and just use it as a conversation starter. Hey, Jennifer, you rated yourself the lowest right here. What's the story there? Is there a story there? What are you thinking? And all it does is just provide a much more rich understanding of the person that you've been entrusted to take care of. Now, in closing, since this is the first of many podcasts that we'll do, our goal is to each Monday morning produce another video podcast. The goal here is to be concise, to make it immediately actionable and educational, and hopefully entertaining in a way that's uniquely us. Some of these will be just a talking head, which is myself, and those will be topics that I feel equipped to handle on my own, things that I've had lots of experience with that I'd love to share and hopefully provide value with. Some of these will bring in the other pro coaches that we have here at BPR with topics that would be enriched by more of a conversational format. And then I have some great friends that over the course of this podcast will bring in a special guest that I think will be really valuable. This is for the coach, but this is also for the individual that just wants to see what it would be like to coach the complete version of themselves. We hope that you'll subscribe. We hope that you'll join us along this journey that we want to take with you. And thank you for listening.